This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock.
Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB. Today in the arena, I am coming at you with my top 10 cards from KALDHEIM for MTG Arena standard best of one competitive play. But you could just call it my channel's top 10. And we're going to start it out with just talking about the cards, the final couple of cuts, as well as some cards that I didn't put on the list and why. If you want to see my most overrated cards, there's a video coming out on that as well. So if there's a card that's not on this list, it might end up on the most overrated cards of KALDHEIM. So make sure to check that video out when it comes out. But the first thing I want to mention are the pathways. Hengegate pathway, Bark Channel pathway, Blight Step pathway, Darkboar pathway. These four pathways are definitely some of the most impactful and important cards in the set. If you play these colors, you should use your wild cards on them at the first opportunity that you get. You obviously don't have to. I know there's some feels bads on using wild cards on lands, but 100% I think that these are some of the most meaningful cards to hit the format. But just like it's lame to use wild cards on lands, it's lame to use top 10 spots on them too. So I am not including any of the pathways in the top 10. They just deserve a very honorable mention. On a similar note, Faceless Haven is a snow land that becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types until end of turn. This is a very, very sweet land that will go in a number of aggro decks. In fact, is so good that a number of aggro decks should retool their mana bases. They might have to cut their Castle Embreths. They might have to cut their modal DFCs to run Faceless Haven because it's so sweet. And it is better than Crawling Barrens in an aggressive deck because for 4 mana you get a 4/3. For Crawling Barrens for 5 mana you get a 2/2. All right, just a much, much better rate. But Faceless Haven would probably make the top 10 list, but it is a land. So we're not including it. We're not including lands in the top 10 spots. The next card, the last card I cut from my top 10 list, and one of the hardest cards to evaluate, in my opinion, in the whole set, is In Search of Greatness. In Search of Greatness is a green-green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you don't, scry 1. Free spells. It doesn't trigger off itself, but it can trigger off of any other permanent that you still have on the battlefield. That means if you play a 3-drop and your opponent doesn't kill it or In Search of Greatness, on turn 4, you can play a 4 mana cost for free from your hand, and then play your land for turn and cast for another 4-drop or use another 4 mana worth abilities from In Search of Greatness. The next upkeep, if that 4-drop is still around and you have a 5-drop in your hand, you can cast it for free, and so on. The scry only works if you don't cast the free card, so keep that in mind. I think that every deck with enough green in it should try In Search of Greatness. They should try a build that tries to curve with In Search of Greatness. I think one of the biggest tricks about In Search of Greatness is you shouldn't count on your things staying alive, and you should assume that if you played a 4-drop and a 5-drop for free, you're probably already winning. You don't need more. What you need is consistent card flow and to replace your threats. And so that's important to me because I think if you're trying to curve this up into 7s, 8s, 9s, I think that's a big mistake. I think you need a very focused amount of 3s and 4-drops. And I think that every deck that runs green should try to be an In Search of Greatness deck. I think Gruul, aggro. I think that mono green, aggro. I think that mono green food. I think, green-white mid-range, Orzhov Doom, because it's permanent. You can play an enchantment and then use the enchantment to play another more expensive enchantment. Abzan Doom, Foretold, right? All these decks should try to be In Search of Greatness decks. My biggest issue with the Doom Foretold decks is the double green cost. I think that's going to be an issue. Pretty big one. So, in my opinion, I'm not sure. I think that all of this has to be experimented with, and if I put this in my top 10, trust me, I thought about putting it as high as number 2 at one point, because it might be that good. But it could also be a dud. I might be just living too much in my head in Magical Christmas Land that this card will hit that often, and your opponent won't be able to do much about it. So, In Search of Greatness, honorable mention. I'm not sure where it falls. I think any deck that runs green needs to try this card because it basically creates free mana, and cards that do that need to be experimented with. It also might be the case that In Search of Greatness is a slow burn. It took a long time. People spotted Wilderness Reclamation and said it was broken immediately, but it took a long time for the deck to get to an absolutely dominant place. Even when the Simic Nexus deck was a thing, it wasn't always the best deck, but by the time we got the kind of 4-color version of Wilderness Reclamation to Fairy Expansion Explosion, the deck just completely took over the format when it had Uro to help it as well. So it might be the case that as more sets are revealed, In Search of Greatness rises in popularity and is eventually broken in the future. So, honorable mention. I'm not sure where it should have gone on the list, if it should be on the list, or if it will turn out to be a dud, but In Search of Greatness is a super notable card from the set. Now moving into the top 10. Soaring in at number 10 is Redane, God of the Worthy. A large number of the double-sided gods that cost 2 or 3 mana made it into my top 10, which is really exciting. I think these are some of the coolest cards in a long time. So Redane is the first one. Legendary creature god. 2 and a white for a 2/3 flying vigilance. Snow lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Non-creature spells your opponent's cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast. Flip it over. Valky, Protected Shield, 3 and a white legendary artifact. If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. Whenever you or another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. Whenever an ability... Okay, we've had a lot of various kind of taxi cards and Archon of Sun's Grace didn't get much attention. Why am I so hyped about this double-sided card? Let's get one thing out of the way on these double face cards. You can play one side and it's legendary, so normally drawing a second or third copy would be bad. But because you can play the other side, it's a different name. You can have the shield and the God of the Worthy on the battlefield at the same time. That matters a lot. It really, really matters a lot. And getting to tag team up your legendary cards with themselves is a pretty sweet one. Now, the Flying Vigilance is not bad. You've got aerial abilities and you can block and attack. It's not a bad set of abilities. But the Snowlands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped could matter a lot. There are a ton of snow builds already. There's just enough snow payoff in the set that most decks are going to want to play a snow card of some kind, or at least experiment with it in the early days of the format. Redane, God of the Worthy, punishes them by making their lands enter the battlefield tapped. It also only affects your opponents. You can still play a snow deck with Redane in it. Also, non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast. So that Wrath of God effect, like Shatter the Sky, that board wipe, that extinction event, even the sweeper that's supposedly like the 3 mana, it's actually a 5, I believe, is the actual cost. I don't know. How does that work against the Foretell card Doomscar? I'm not sure. Anyway, most of these 4 or more cost cards in Standard are the Haymakers, the Absolute Finishers, the Ember Cleaves, the Great Henges. Making them cost 2 more to cast is a tremendous tax. And it only affects the opponents. Again, I can't stress enough, it doesn't affect you, which is why I don't think that Redane is only a card for mono white aggro decks. I think that this has a definite spot in both sideboards and possibly main decks of white decks that play mid-range, because how many times have the control mages fought the Elspeth Conquers Death War. ECD or ECD or ECD or ECD. If you resolve this, they're going to have a really hard time with that ECD. Not only that, ECD can get this back if it dies. Not only that, if this is on the battlefield and the ECD tax goes off, they have to pay 4 additional mana for non-creature spells. That's so hard to overcome. So obviously this is a big time card with ECD for those reasons, which was already a great card in the format. Now the shield, the other side. One of the best things that these gods, these double-faced gods, can do is if the front side is a creature with an ability that isn't an enters the battlefield ability, it's just like you pay this much for these stats. The nasty thing that happens, and the reason these cards often don't make it in Standard, is because if the opponent has a removal spell, they just kill it, and you didn't gain anything other than spending your mana. For example, if they have a Heartless Act, they spend 2 mana to kill this, you spent 3 mana on it, you didn't really gain anything. Your opponent is up 1 mana in overall mana spent, and they're up tempo, because if they're the one playing Heartless Act, they're usually pretty happy to take away your 3-drop and then untap and be the first mover. So normally it dies to Doomblade is the argument you hear, because Doomblade was one of the first and similar Heartless Act things. The great thing about these double-faced artifact sides of these cards is that if you believe your opponent is the Doomblade player, just play the artifact. They'll probably have a much harder time dealing with it if they have creature removal that's clogging up their deck. They might not have any way in their whole deck to kill an artifact. Just play this side and get the effect. Now, if the opponent's not aggressive, maybe preventing 1 damage from their sources doesn't feel like much, but the ability to tax them for an additional mana whenever a spell or ability targets something you control, that's intense. When the first time your opponent taps out to play Elspeth Conquers Death and targets something other than the shield, that's going to be a feels bad moment. There's no takesy backsies there. Countering abilities is a key part of it. We've had this effect without that line, that it makes this card a lot better. So I'm super excited to play with Redane God of Worthy. It's my number 10 best card in the set. Coming in at number 9, Jorn, God of Winter. Jorn Snow. Everybody will make that joke, so will I. This is 2 and a green legendary snow creature god, 3/3. Whenever Jorn attacks, untap each snow permanent you control. Flip it over. KALDHEIM the Rhyme Staff, 1 blue and a black legendary snow artifact. Tap, you may play target snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. Awesome. Everything I just said about Redane applies here as well. You can have out the Rhyme Staff and you can have Jorn. If you believe that the opponent has removal for Jorn, just play the Rhyme Staff and we'll get Jorn later. The cards can be on the battlefield at the same time, which is why Jorn God of Winter is one of the finest cards in the set at playing with itself. I'm sorry, that probably came out wrong. At playing with his staff. There's no way around this. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that if you control Jorn, the God of Winter, you can attack, untap all of your snowlands and any other snow permanents you control, including the Rhyme Staff itself. So say that you start your turn with the Rhyme Staff, you target a land in your graveyard, you play the land from the graveyard, now you attack with Jorn, God of Winter. Jorn untaps the Rhyme Staff and the lands that maybe you used to play something else before you attacked. I don't know. You played a Questing Beast. You played a Questing Beast. That's what we did. And now we untap Jorn. We untap all the lands. We untap the Rhyme Staff. If the opponent blocks the Jorn, God of Winter, with another creature and kills it, say a Lovestruck Beast, now we can tap the Rhyme Staff, target the Jorn that's in the graveyard, and replay it. And be ready to do it again next turn, generating a lot of mana and a lot of advantage, turn after turn. That's why I think that Jorn, God of Winter, isn't... The Sultai pairing with the Rhyme Staff makes for a really cool mid-rangey game plan of eventual inevitability. Eventually, you're just casting a bunch of snow cards from your graveyard, including Jorn, and you're generating a ton of mana in your Sultai mid-range kind of control deck with a bunch of removal and a little bit of card draw. turns into this huge mana value engine that just overwhelms the opponent in the mid game. I think that that is a really cool place for Jorn, God of Winter, but it isn't the only place. This card, maybe you don't need the Rhyme Staff at all. Maybe you just play it as a 3-mana 3/3. Now, you'll say, well, when you attack with it, what if you just attack it and chump attack into it? To get the untap ability, you just end up running it into giant creatures. Well, we can play around that in green. For example, if on turn 4 in our Gruul deck, we play Jorn of Winter on 3, then on turn 4 we play Questing Beast. We attack with Jorn of Winter and Questing Beast. We untap the 4 lands. We untap the Jorn, God of Winter. The opponent blocks the God of Winter with the Lovestruck Beast or whatever, and we cast the Ember Cleave and just whipsaw through their blockers. I guess it wouldn't go through a Lovestruck Beast. Editor, change the blocker to a Questing Beast. The opponent is blocking with a Questing Beast. Anyway, you get what I mean. We get to untap our lands and then use it to play Ember Cleave or some other effect that gets Jorn, God of Winter, through scot-free. What if we get to play Heroic Intervention to give it indestructible or to save it from the opponent's Doomscald or other Wrath effect on the next turn? What if we use it to play fight cards like Ram Through or Inscription of Abundance, and that clears the way and lets Jorn survive till the next turn while also enhancing it? There are lots of ways that we can use the ability to untap our snowlands, and Wilderness Reclamation certainly taught us that more mana is a good thing. This card is a mana engine and a card advantage engine tied into one thing, and I think that makes it a really good card, so it's my number 9 in the set. Number 8 is Egon, the God of Death. This is 2 and a black for a legendary creature god, whose name is Egon, like Egon Spengler from Ghostbusters. It's a black creature. They know what they're doing, I'm telling you, they know. This is a 6/6 for 3, and it has Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Egon and draw a card. Turn it over, and you have the Throne of Death. This is 1 black legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. And then 2 and a black, exile a creature card from your graveyard, draw a card. The mill is not targeted. You have to mill yourself. You can't mill the opponent with this. I've seen this mistake made a few times. And honestly, the wording, especially if you're new to like mill as a keyword, would imply that maybe you get to target it, so I understand. Anyway, it's another god. It's another dual side card. It's all the things we said before. You can have the legendary artifact and you can have the creature, so drawing multiples isn't a bad thing. The legendary artifact helps fuel the creature, but it's also a card advantage engine on its own. So if you believe that your opponent is Master of Heartless Act, then you play the artifact side and you use it to draw a bunch of cards and overwhelm the Heartless Act instead. The neat thing about Egon, God of Death, is that it does last a turn cycle no matter what. If you're playing against Gruul and you tap 3 mana to play your 6/6 Death Touch creature, even if you have no creatures in, even if you don't have the cards in the graveyard to make Egon work, the opponent is facing a 6/6 brick wall. Their Brushfire Elemental and their Lovestruck Beast aren't going to attack into that thing, probably. On the other hand, when it comes around to your upkeep, you can put the trigger to exile 2 cards on the stack, and if you can't, you're going to sacrifice it and draw a card, which isn't terrible. It replaced itself. Maybe it found you that extinction event that you wanted. Or maybe, with the trigger on the stack and 1 card in your graveyard already, like a Fable Passage, you cast Heartless Act. You destroy the opponent's Lovestruck Beast, then you exile the Heartless Act and the Fable Passage from your graveyard, and voila! Egon lives another day. So I think that there's a lot of play to the card. Now when we're talking about a 3 mana 6/6, we can talk about some really awesome things to pair with it. For one thing, 3 mana Great Henge. Not bad, seems good. How about Ember Cleave? Ember Cleave combined with Death Touch means take 13 to the face, even if it was blocked by 1 creature. That's insane. But perhaps one of my favorite uses for Egon will be out of the sideboard, or in best of 1, in the main deck, as a surprise hoser for rogues. Yeah, they fill your graveyard. Egon exiles cards from the graveyard and beats them in the face. Now, they might be able to Heartless Act the thing, but they will have a hard time drowning it in the lock if you don't give them a lot of cards in the graveyard. They have to mill you, then this keeps exiling it every single turn. So a pretty sweet card against rogues. Finally, the artifact Throne of Death that mills you is definitely going to be a part of some cool combo decks like Emergent Ultimatum. No, it is Emergent? No, Emergent is Sultai. Eerie. It'll be a part of Eerie Ultimatum. Maybe some other Reanimator decks if there's something of that nature in the format. But definitely, without question, this fuels Kroxa and Ox of Agonis a lot. Making sure that you have the mana to use your escape cards from the graveyard on a regular basis just ensures that you don't run out of stuff to do. So Throne of Death on its own is a very, very interesting card that might have seen play, as it's one of the best self-mill options available. And the fact that you tack on Egon the God of Death makes it so much better. So that's why it adds up to the number 8 card on my list. Coming in at number 7 is a big red dragon. The Goldspan Dragon is 3 red for a flying haste. Whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Treasures you control have tap. Sacrifice this artifact. Add 2 mana of any one color. It is a 4/4. Just on its own, without talking about anything else going on with the card. If this comes down and gets the chance to turn sideways and attack the opponent, you get a treasure that can be sacked for 2 mana. It's like you got a rebate on your 5-drop, so you actually paid 3 mana for a 4/4 flying haste. Does this remind you of any card? Is there another card that costed 5 and then goes down to 3 because it gives you 2 mana back and then you can use the 2 mana to defend the card? Oh wait, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. You heard it here first, folks. Goldspan Dragon is the new Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. But something that we learned, and we learned this pretty fast about Teferi, that untapping 2 lands is no joke because you can use that mana to interact with the board or defend Teferi. And Goldspan Dragon is the same way. You can sacrifice that treasure to negate the spell that targets the gold, that would remove the Goldspan Dragon or the Ember Cleave or the Great Henge. You can sacrifice it to cast the Heartless Act and kill the thing. You can sacrifice it to cast the Bone Crusher Giant and kill the other thing. Goldspan Dragon, the mana rebate, it's going to mean a lot. Now, do you have to play a bunch of other treasures to make this card good? No, but you can. Do you want to play some janky combos like Defiant Strike and Sure Strike and other pump effects and maybe Raking Claws to give it double strike and just combo off? Probably not, but you can. Like these are all decks that are worth trying. So for me, Goldspan Dragon fits into mid-range decks where you just want that mana advantage. It fits into a top-end curve of an aggro deck that wants to finish the opponent. It fits into a control deck that wants to play a threat and then protect it. All of these decks are worth experimenting and trying out Goldspan Dragon in. Not only that, it's a creature-type dragon. There are always cards in Magic that come around to take advantage of that creature type because we all know that dragons are cool. Magda, Brazen, Outlaw is one in this set that says sacrifice 5 treasures to search for a dragon and put it onto the battlefield. Do we have enough dwarves to make Magda work? I don't think so. But could we get them in future sets? Possibly. Or could we get other ways to make treasures in future sets? Possibly. Which means we might just be able to throw this dragon onto the battlefield for frickin' free at some point with Magda. So for me, this card is a very, very powerful mythic rare, an excellent card, exciting for all kinds of different archetypes, and it's my number 6 card in the set. Next up, we have another red card, very, very off-brand, but the show goes on. This is Bergy, the God of Storytelling, another one of our double-face gods. Whenever you cast a spell, add red. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Weird wording, until end of turn, so the turn that you cast the spell, you don't lose the mana, so it's not going to pass over. And then I also think that it means if you play it in your end step. It doesn't say the beginning of your end step, so you can't cheat it into the next turn that way. Also, it says you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end, so I think some people will tap all their mana thinking they get to keep it through a phase. No, it's only the mana created by Bergy, according to the card. Next line. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. And then on the flip side, we get the Harnfeld Hornet Bounty, 4 and a red, legendary artifact. Discard a card. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. It's open-ended. You can do this for as many times as you have a card in your hand. Woo! All right. So side number 1, the body, has a mana engine that lets you cheat mana through phases within the turn, which, for the most part, either lets you cast some Ember Cleaves or some good combat tricks like Rimrock Knight or other instants, or it activates boast abilities. The card obviously wants some boasting to be done. That's why it says creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. All of this has tremendous combo potential with Song of Creation, where you get to make mana and draw 2 cards and just go off. But aside from that, it just has tremendous damage output potential when you combine this with a bunch of other red cards that either have boast abilities or have adventure mechanics like Bonecrusher Giant and Rimrock Knight that can play multiple spells. So it's an enabler for certain types of red cards. And because of that, I think you have to retool mono red almost entirely to take advantage of the card. But you should also try retooling a number of other decks that just play red in them. Boros and Gruul, for example, or Is It, for example, could use a lot of retooling because the horn is legit. I think that Harnfeld, Horn of Bounty, is the first saxophone because it is so sexy. If you have 3 cards in your hand and you exile them, you reveal 6 cards. Now you have to play them this turn or they stay exiled. But if you're digging for one specific burn spell to end the game, it does it. It turns any card into a 1-turn light up the stage. And it just seems like an inevitability machine. If the horn is sitting on the battlefield, you just have the opportunity to get 2 random cards for the 1 random you draw each turn all the time. And I don't know how people beat that. But if you combine it with a card draw effect, for example, another card that we're going to get to later that enters the battlefield and draws a lot of cards when you play a land without having to spend mana, now you can exile all those cards and reveal double that many cards. Just puts together combos. It just puts together what you need. It sounds absolutely insane to me. And it follows in the God tradition. You can have both on the battlefield. So that whenever you cast a spell, you get a free mana. And then you can exile any card from your hand to reveal 2 more spells. It's such a wild red combo card that I think there has to be a deck for it. And I think a lot of things need to be revisioned, and I think a lot of people don't just grasp how crazy this card can be if left unchecked. And yeah, I'm afraid of this card. Seriously afraid. I look forward to some more creative red decks, and for that reason, it is definitely on my list in the number 6 spot. Valky, God of Lies. The Return of Tybalt. Coming in the number 5. This is a legendary creature god. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card. They reveal this way until Valky leaves the battlefield. X, choose a creature card exiled with Valky with converted mana cost X. Valky becomes a copy of the card. 2/1. That's just the front. Flip it over and you get Tybalt, the Cosmic Imposter. 5 black red with 5 loyalty. When it enters the battlefield, as it enters the battlefield. So even if they counter it, No, it's just there's no trigger. Okay, they can counter it and you don't get the emblem. But anyway, you get an emblem with You may play cards exiled with Tibalt, Cosmic Imposter, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast the spells. So, right there, no matter what, even if they kill the Tibalt, you can cast this because you have the emblem. You can cast things that Tibalt exiles. Want to get that out of the way right away. +2, exile the top card of each player's library. A +2 that virtually draws 2 cards, one from each library. -3, exile target artifact or creature. And remember, you exiled it. Now you get to cast it. Nice. -8, exile all cards from all graveyards and add red, red, red. Exile all cards from all graveyards. And you make triple red so that you can use some mana to cast the things. Oh my goodness. Draw both players' graveyards. I don't like evaluating Planeswalkers on their ultimate, but that's an exciting one. So Tibalt is super expensive. And it draws a ton of cards, and its board impact upon resolution is somewhat minimal. It only gets rid of one thing. One artifact or creature can be exiled immediately. You get to cast it next turn, even if Tibalt dies, if you want to. You do have to control the board, so I think Tibalt will best be paired in a board control kind of shell that keeps the opponent from taking over, because you really want to land Tibalt, exile the one thing they have, and then take over the game from there. That's what you really want. Even better if they have nothing. So right away I'm looking at this like a Rakdos and Grixis control mega all-star. But let's talk about Valky, the God of Lies. Like with all the other dual-face gods, you can have both. You can play one side, you can play the other side. It's sweet. This is a interesting one. Obviously a commander superstar. This will be a really fun deck to build because it hits each opponent. But the fun part about this is it has kind of a Kitesail freebooter effect, but because they get the creature back if they kill Valky, you know what I mean? They're going to definitely go right out and try to kill this with the removal spell. But the cool thing about it is if you turn Valky into the creature before they get to remove it, they don't get their creature back. That's because when you choose the card exiled, Valky becomes a copy of the card. It loses all the other text it has to become that copy. So if you exile their Selfless Savior with Valky, and you see in their hand that they have like 2 Skyclave apparitions, right? So taking the Skyclave wouldn't do anything. Or say they have a Glass Casket that you couldn't take. If you, on turn 3, exile a Selfless Savior and then pay 1 to turn Valky into the Selfless Savior, which you can do, by the way, at instant speed in response to, say, the Glass Casket, then when the opponent does Glass Casket the Valky, they do not get back that Selfless Savior. It stays exiled. Pretty cool. A pretty cool out to that ability that isn't obvious, I think, to most people the first time that they read the card. So, probably, it really feels like Grixis Control would love this card. It feels like Rakdos midrange with the Kroxa deck that just kind of whittles down your resources and then needs a haymaker to take over the game will love this card. I also feel like the big red deck that uses Ironcrag Feet to cast Ugin would also love this card. You can just splash the black off the pathways and maybe a couple of temples and Solemn Simulacrum and run a bit of Tibalt Cosmic Imposter as something else that you can ramp into and cast Ironcrag Feet and resolve. So for me, this card is an absolute late-game bomb, a mid-game pretty good, and it just has no downside. If you don't have the mana to cast Tibalt, you don't have a 7-drop clogging up your hand, keeping you from staying in the game. You just cast Valky. And if your opponent isn't likely to play many creatures, then you just wait for Tibalt. Another really fun thing about this card, if you are playing a grindy matchup as Rakdos or Big Red versus Esper Yorion often does, at some point, they're probably just going to use their mana to buy their Yorion. Just Valky their Yorion. When they buy their commander, just go take it with Valky. Oh my gosh, if you take a Lurrus with this and then turn Valky into the Lurrus, you can use the Lurrus to play a dead Valky from earlier from the graveyard. So great. It's going to be fun. You're going to love it. So Valky, God of Lies, Tybalt the Cosmic Imposter is my number 5. My number 4 card is Showdown of the Scalds. Showdown of the Scalds is 2 red-white Enchantment Saga. Chapter 1, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Chapters 2 and 3. Whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This was one of the... I think this was the first card previewed, so I think a lot of people have forgotten about it. But this is a 4-mana draw 4 that is blinkable. Obviously with Yorion, that's really cool, but there are probably other ways to remove this from the battlefield or re-trigger the intro ability by getting it back from the graveyard. Chapter 1, just the fact that Chapter 1 is this draw 4 effect that sets you up for your future turns is so awesome. And remember, it's until your next turn, the light up the stage treatment. So your next turn is pretty telegraphed to your opponent, but that doesn't mean they can stop it. Now, chapters 2 and 3 are interesting because you take this card advantage machine and you add an incentive to play aggressively. I think that any deck that can kind of splash into Boros that has an aggressive angle probably wants to run some number of these as a reload, but don't sleep on chapters 2 and 3. +1/+1 counters are really useful. If you have a few instants, either in your hand or revealed, and you attack with some creatures and you're on chapter 2 or 3, how does the opponent block? It's so hard to figure out the right thing to do. Will they play the card that was exiled because they only have till the end of the turn to play it? Or are they going to play something else entirely from their hand that you didn't prepare for? I mean, and if they don't block, they might take lethal damage. They don't know how much damage they're taking. It's pretty crazy. And especially with the double face cards, with adventure cards, with all these, with the lands that can also be spells, there's so many options that can help you double spell on turns 5 or 6 so that you're casting multiple spells that turn, getting the triggers multiple times. Pretty amazing. The +1/+1 counters have serious synergy right now with a number of other things in the format. Conclave Mentor, Swarm Shambler, some of these cards, they don't see a ton of play. But what about Voranklex? Oh, I just foretold the future. There is a card in this set that lets you double the counters that are put on things. It's freaking amazing. So there is so much going on with this card that even if it were just Chapter 1, if it were only Chapter 1, I would think it would get play somewhere. But the fact that you get paid even more for being aggressive, I think this is one of the better cards in the set, a sleeper that a lot of people forgot about, and it fits into control-y, value-y shells, but also creature decks. So, Showdown of the Scalds. Don't forget about this card. One of the best cards in the set, and my number 4. Coming in at number 3. Yeah, I foretold it. Now we're going to play it. Voranklex, the Monstrous Raider. This is 4 green, Trample Haste by Rexian Praetor. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. If you're doing it, you get double. If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of these kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. 6/6 Trample Haste is a really important stat line that means when the opponent has dealt with your plan A, whether it's like a snow aggro elf deck, whether it's a mono green stompy beating machine, whether it's a Gruul aggro deck, whether it's a Selesnya Conclave Mentor deck, whatever plan A is, they already fought it. But then for 6 mana, or maybe 5 with Castle Garenbrig, down comes Voranklex, the Monstrous Raider, gets in for 6 right away. That puts them either really low on life, or they might just be dead, or maybe it killed a Planeswalker. Awesome. Now there's this ability. They have to deal with this thing, and if you have any way to take advantage of this the turn that it comes into play, all kinds of nonsense can break loose. Luminarch Aspirant can make this an 8/8. Woo! That is like the minimum. If you have a great Henge in play, that makes this an 8/8, as well as 2 counters on everything else that you play. Pretty awesome. But when you combine Voranklex with things like Planeswalkers and Sagas, nonsense happens. Now, I am done trying to claim that I know exactly what happens when you play a Saga or exactly what happens when you play a Planeswalker, because no matter what I say, somebody is going to jump into comments and say it's the opposite and tell me I'm wrong, and I don't know which of you have actual judge credentials. So if you want to start a good argument on the internet, name a card like a Saga or a Planeswalker and tell people online how it works with Voranklex, and you will get comments. So leave your favorite Voranklex, please, I actually want this. Please leave your favorite Voranklex synergies, interactions in the comments. One of my favorites for sure, and I know that this is how it works. If the opponent plays an Elspeth Conquers Death, nothing happens. It can't get a counter on it because it uses Sagas. Sagas use counters to count the chapters. It just hits the battlefield and nothing happens. I freaking love that. But I really do want to know, and I can't wait to see what happens when you play a Planeswalker. Does it have double loyalty? When you plus the Planeswalker, does it gain double loyalty? When the opponent minuses their Planeswalker, does the effect work? When they plus their Planeswalker, does it gain any loyalty? Probably not, but does the effect even happen? I don't know. I'm not a judge. I figure these things out by playing the cards. I'm not one of the people who needs to know how everything works before I try it. I try things and then learn. So anyway, Voranklex, without question, even without understanding all the interactions, I think is easily one of the best cards in the set, one of the most exciting by far, and it also foretells something, doesn't it? What's up with these Phyrexians? How did they get where they went? Probably crossed the Cosmic Bridge, right? I wonder where else they might turn up. Anyway, big love for Voranklex. Moving on to my number 2, an actual Foretold card. This is Doomscar. Here at the top, my blue-white mageness might finally just shine through. My bias might hit harder than normal, but you're not going to stop me. I'm going to be me, darn it. 3 white sorcery, destroy all creatures. That on its own would be meh at this stage in development. We have a variety of 5-mana wraths that have extra abilities, right? But we also have some 4-mana wraths like Shatter the Sky and Extinction Event that have arguable drawbacks. They don't even hit everything. But what if there were a 3-mana Wrath of God type effect, area of effect, destroy all things, that didn't actually have a drawback? This is Foretell 1 white, which means that on turn 2 you can pay 2 to exile it, and on turn 3 you can pay 3 to destroy all creatures. Boom. The first thing I'm going to do is correct something I just said. This does have a drawback. Actually, I never said this had no drawback. I said what if one existed without that. This does have a drawback. You do have to take turn 2 off. For a control deck, that's not really much of a drawback. We take turn 2 off all the time. This might just mean that we don't play Omen of the Sea or Mazemind Tome, or not as many of them. But it's really normal for a control deck to do nothing on turn 2. The idea that Foretell is a thing on multiple decent cards like Saw It Coming and Behold the Multiverse, I think is the name of it. The fact that those rather good cards also have Foretell means that just foretelling this on turn 2 with like some white and blue mana showing, the opponent will immediately think they have a Wrath. You know this is true. If you watch any streams or if you've ever streamed yourself, every single time you put 2 creatures on the battlefield, somebody in chat immediately starts saying, oh, they're going to Wrath. Oh no, Wrath incoming. Loses to Wrath. You're going to lose to Wrath. You're going to get Wrath. Why? Because getting your board full of creatures Wrath is one of the biggest feels bads that you receive in Magic, and you learn about it really early in your Magic career. The first time your red deck has 4 creatures on the battlefield, none of them named Annex Hardened in the Forge, and the opponent shatters the sky. It's like is like a quick learning curve? Well, just the ability to foretell any card and imply that you may have Doomscar is going to have a serious mental impact on aggro mages and the format itself. There are going to be people who want this card banned. There are going to be people who say this card makes aggro unplayable. And I don't think any of that's remotely true, but I think the fear of feels bads is so strong that this is going to be my favorite card. Just knowing I'm psychologically torturing my opponent with every foretell card I play, even if this isn't in my deck, is going to feel so good. The fail case for the card for sure is that you have 4 lands and the opponent has a full board and you top deck this. And you can't play it. That's going to suck. But I think that the scenario I just mentioned is going to be so much rarer than the positive scenario where you can foretell it on 2 and then play it on 3 if you want, that this is 100% an awesome card. Not only that, the real control mages, the serious control mages, the ones who make control mage work, they understand that it isn't just about tapping out and wrathing your opponent. It's about not letting the opponent gain that tempo back, because you're tapped out, the board is clear, the opponent still gets to be the first mover. They still have the tempo. The real key is to swing the tempo completely. You need to blow up their board and neutralize the turn that follows. And with Doomscar, you are much more likely to do that, because it only costs you 3 mana to cast the Foretold Doomscar, and then you can hold 2 or 3 mana open to deal with the next card the opponent plays. That play pattern is going to be devastating. When the opponent gets their board Doomscarred and then they go to rebuild with a Questing Beast, or they try to cast a Planeswalker and they get countered or they get removed. That is where this card is really going to make its money in the competitive circuit, and it's going to be awesome. Doomscar, I love it. It's my number 2. And my number 1, this one is a completely biased call from me, because I think there is a legitimate chance, if I'm being really real with you guys, that this card doesn't see much play. I think there is a chance that that world happens. But I have never been more excited to play with a new card in a long time as I am to play with Kazima, God of the Voyage. 2 and a blue, legendary creature god. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile Kazima. If you do, it gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Kazima is exiled, you may put a Voyage counter on it. If you don't, return Kazima to the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Draw X cards where X is the number of Voyage counters on it. 2/4. And the other side is the Omen Keel, 1 in a blue, 3/3 crew, 1 legendary artifact vehicle. Whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. Hydrate. Remember to stretch. Oh my gosh, that's so much text, but what does it add up to? One of the double-sided gods that is the best at playing with themselves, because on turn 2, if you draw 2 of this, you can play the Omen Keel. On turn 3, you can crew it with Kazima, and you can attack and exile some lands, and the next turn, after you exile Kazima, you can start playing those lands and putting counters on the exiled Kazima. Every land you play, another counter. Every land you play, another counter. And remember, we have all these lands that are also spells, so we have these decisions to make about whether we cast a spell or play the land, but there's no reason not to be hitting your land drops right now in Standard. You definitely have the resources. So, eventually, when you play that last land, or even better yet, when you play that Fable Passage and then crack it, eventually, you bring Kazima, God of the Voyage, back and you draw some cards. I would expect the first Kazima to feel like the first Sphinx's revelation. It was a baby rev, they called it. You would draw 2 or 3 cards, and just a little bit of gas, not devastating, just a little bit to keep things going. But you made a 4/6 or a 5/7, a huge blocker, and you can bring it in instant speed if you have a Fable Passage or Evolving Wilds to sacrifice. or if the opponent Field of Ruins on their turn, or a Field of Ruin of your own. These cards can bring this out at instant speed to jump into combat and block, and again, you get that card draw. When the trigger goes off, if the opponent wants to use things along the lines of Whirlwind Denial or Sublime Epiphany, they have to target the trigger that goes off while this card is in exile before you make the choice. Because remember, it's a choice. You may put the counter on, you may not. Therefore, it's super awkward and for the most part can't be countered because you can always just choose not to put the counter on it if they play a Whirlwind Denial or if they play a Sublime Epiphany. I believe this is true. Obviously, I'm not a Magic judge. I'm going by how I think the stack will work in Arena based on how other things have worked. So let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. But once the trigger goes off, when you choose yes, return this to the battlefield. From what I see, you get to draw the cards and put this on the battlefield with the counters before the opponent gets to take any action. They can't counter it. They can't stop the card draw. They can't Heartless Act the creature before the +1/+1 counters end up on it. It's there, and you get those cards. Sweet. Maybe you ambush block something, maybe you attack something, but here's the other thing. At the beginning of the next upkeep, you get to choose whether or not to exile Kazima again and start all over. Because if you drew some lands off those fresh cards, you might want to turn those into more cards as well. If you can play a long game with this card, every land you play from turn 3 on when you exiled it is a free card at some point in the future. That to me sounds insane. Insane and pretty broken. The fail case on the card is that you play it on turn 3 and the opponent kills it before it's exiled. If you're playing a control deck and you're playing against a deck that is aggro or mid-range, taking that turn to kill it might be really awkward for their curve, really awkward for their development. But if they don't, you might just have tremendous value going forward for the rest of the game, and it might feel like they can do nothing about it. And of course, if you think your opponent is the Doomblade player, just play the other side. The Omen Keel is perfectly awesomely crewable. Once it hits, you may play the lands from it for as long as they remain exiled. Even if the Omen Keel gets killed after that, you still have some free land drops from your opponent. And it's crewed for just one crew. Shark Typhoon. You know, you can make a baby shark to crew it at instant speed. Awesome. You can play Omen of the Sun and crew it at instant speed. Awesome. You can play Skyclave Apparition, exile their blocker, and attack with this. Same thing with Baron, Tolarian Archmage, bouncing their blocker. Awesome. There's so many ways that this can fit into even the most controlling deck, but in mid-range decks, I think this card's going to be insane. In mid-range decks, the person who has this going in the mirror is going to be favored. I just think this card is amazing, and I haven't been this excited to play with the card when it was revealed in a long time. Not Yorion, you know, not Shark Typhoon. Both of those cards, when they were revealed, I thought they looked really cool. This card, I want to sleeve up right now. The second I read it, I wanted to play it. And that's obviously coloring my Blue Mage ways and making this my #1 card in the set. But if I can't, if on my own channel, in my own top 10 review, if I'm not true to myself talking about the cards I'm most excited about and rating them where they are to me, then what am I doing? So let me know. Am I way too high on Kazima? Is this really the new definition of card advantage in the new world? Or is maybe just the kind of blue decks that I like to play not good, and will this card just kind of add more clunk to it? Let me know, because I don't think this only goes in control decks. I think that there's plenty of room in mid-range, maybe even an aggro, some kind of aggro deck. So let me know what you think. That is the top 10 cards for me, CGB, from KALDHEIM, that I am so immensely excited to play with. I think the set looks amazing. I'm so happy about it. If your favorite card wasn't here, you might enjoy the most overrated cards in the set video coming out soon. And remember, if you like the content, to hit the like and subscribe button here on YouTube if you want to support the channel. You can get a YouTube membership to see some bonus videos and some early access. You can sign up on Patreon to send me messages to talk about various decks and to see some behind the scenes content, including pictures of my dogs or my commander deck lists before I play them. And if you want to support the channel on Twitch, you can use a Prime Gaming subscription for free to support the channel and get me paid on Twitch. All that information in the description. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I will see you in the next video. You're cool.